You see that man over there? The one my daughter swears is her future? Last week, he looked me up and down, sneered at my $300 suit, and called me a clerk. A clerk, like I was some nobody standing in line at the DMV. He had no idea who I was, no clue about the weight of the gavel I've carried for decades. And when he leaned across the table, smirking, telling me he'd cover the wedding so I wouldn't embarrass anyone, that's when it hit me. That's when the old fire in my chest lit back up. Because if Mortimer thought he could humiliate me in my own family and walk away untouched, well, he was about to learn a lesson he'd never forget. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The room smelled of roast turkey and cinnamon candles. Livia's way of pretending her fiancé wasn't dripping condescension all over the evening. He clinked his wine glass like he owned the place, laughing just a little too loud, his Rolex catching the Christmas lights. I sat there silent, watching. Years on the bench had taught me, patience is sharper than any blade. Dad, Livia whispered, her hand squeezing mine under the table, just let him talk. I nodded, but my mind wasn't still. Mortimer's words weren't just insults. They were verdicts he thought he could hand down. And I knew men like him. They always put themselves on a witness stand sooner or later. I stirred my coffee slowly, the spoon ringing against the cup like a gavel striking wood. My decision was already made, because come Christmas, he'd try to shame me in front of the world, and that's when the tide would turn. The next morning, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Number unknown. I picked it up, half expecting a clerk from the courthouse. Instead, it was Mortimer. His voice oozed sugar, the kind that sticks to your teeth. Judge, Mr. Carter, he started, clearing his throat. About last night. Maybe I came off a little blunt. I leaned back in my chair, watching the winter sun creep across the backyard. Go on. He chuckled, fake and hollow. Look, I don't want any hard feelings, but we have to be realistic. Livia's wedding? It's not just a family dinner, it's an event. People are flying in from D.C., from Boston. They expect a certain standard. I stayed quiet. Silence, I'd learned, rattles the guilty more than shouting. So he pressed on. Here's what I propose. I'll take care of everything. Venue, catering, even attire. But his voice sharpened like a scalpel. That suit of yours? That has to go. You show up in that thing, and I promise you, you won't be walking your daughter down the aisle. I won't allow it. My jaw tightened. The man was giving me an ultimatum in my own home. You're saying, I spoke slowly, that unless I change my clothes, I'm not welcome at my own daughter's wedding? Exactly, he snapped, relieved I'd understood. I knew you'd see reason. Trust me, Judge, sir, this is for everyone's good. I ended the call without another word. The old oak clock ticked behind me, each swing of the pendulum like a countdown. He thought he'd box me in, but he had no idea the trial had already begun, and he was a defendant. That night I sat alone in my study, the fireplace crackling low, shadows crawling across shelves stacked with law books and case files. My whole career I'd watched arrogant men unravel, not by force, but by their own tongues, their own hubris. Mortimer was no different. I pulled my old suit jacket from the hanger, the same one he called cheap. I ran my hand over the fabric. $300. Not Armani, not custom. But it carried something he'd never buy. Every Christmas dinner, every court inauguration, every memory of a life built on honor instead of vanity. To me, it was priceless. I could have ended it right there. A single phone call, one headline in the papers, and Mortimer's ego would have been reduced to dust. But something deeper stirred in me. It wasn't enough to expose him privately. Men like him thrive in silence. They rot only under light. So I chose patience. I'd keep my mouth shut, let him build his little empire of smug remarks and empty threats. I would walk into that wedding in this very suit. And when he moved to strike me down, when he thought victory was his, that's when the walls would collapse around him. My reflection in the darkened window looked older, yes, lines carved by decades of trials and disappointments. But my eyes, they were sharp, unblinking, the eyes of a judge preparing for the final case. And Mortimer? He had already delivered his opening statement. The verdict was just a matter of time. The day of the wedding came. A perfect, crisp December morning, with the sun casting long shadows over the snow-covered lawns of the country club. Everything was set for Mortimer's grand show, a wedding where the rich could flaunt their wealth and the poor could stay in their place. And me? I was still just a clerk in his eyes, still a man whose suit didn't fit the bill. As I walked into the grand hall, I felt all eyes on me. The guests, draped in designer dresses and suits that cost more than my car, exchanged whispers. They weren't whispering about Livia or the beautiful ceremony. No, they were whispering about the old man in the cheap suit, the one who didn't know his place. Mortimer's eyes locked onto me from across the room. For a split second, I saw the smirk creep onto his face, a quiet, arrogant victory. He made his way toward me, his steps quick, almost like he was chasing me down. "You're really going through with this, huh?" He sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're actually going to embarrass my fiancé like this?" I stood still, meeting his gaze. "I'm here for my daughter's wedding. Nothing more, nothing less." His lips tightened, but he quickly masked it with another laugh, his arms spreading wide. "Well, I guess the party can't be perfect without a clown, right?" The crowd tensed, waiting for my response. I could feel Mortimer's anticipation, his belief that he had me cornered. And then, just as he was about to say something more, something that would have sealed my fate, something unexpected happened. One of the security guards, a tall man named Forrest, walked over. He glanced between me and Mortimer. "Sir," Forrest said, his voice low but steady. "Judge Carter, right?" Mortimer froze. The smugness in his eyes faltered. Forrest didn't wait for a reply. "I'm sorry, sir, but you're going to have to go." Mortimer turned pale. "What? You're kicking me out?" And just like that, the walls Mortimer built around himself began to crumble. The room was silent, save for the crackling of the fire and the soft murmur of confused whispers. Mortimer's face, once flushed with the arrogance of a man who thought the world revolved around him, now looked pale, almost desperate. "Do you know who I am?" he spat, the words thick with disbelief. "I'm Mortimer Gray. I'm the one paying for this wedding." Forrest, the security guard, stood his ground. His voice was firm, steady. "Doesn't matter, sir. Judge Carter's the VIP here." The look on Mortimer's face was priceless. It was as though the ground beneath him had opened up and swallowed his confidence whole. His gaze flickered from Forrest to me, and in that brief moment I saw it, the realization dawning on him that this wasn't some game, that his words had consequences. You can't be serious." Mortimer stammered, stepping back. The room watched, waiting for him to make his next move. But instead of throwing his usual tantrum, Mortimer froze. I saw his mind working, scrambling for a way out, a way to salvage some shred of dignity. It was almost pathetic. For a moment, I felt a twinge of sympathy. Almost. Then I remembered his earlier words. The way he had insulted my suit, the way he'd made his assumptions, thought he could control me with money and status. And just like that, the sympathy was gone. He wasn't about to get out of this unscathed. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" Mortimer finally muttered, the heat returning to his voice. But there was no more confidence in it, only the sharp edge of frustration. I shook my head, my voice calm. "No, Mortimer, I'm not." As I took a step back, the eyes of everyone in the room turned to Mortimer, waiting for him to react. He had no escape now. He had already lost, and he knew it. Mortimer's hands curled into fists at his sides, knuckles white against the polished cufflinks he was so proud of. He glanced around the ballroom, desperate for an ally. But every pair of eyes, politicians, doctors, even distant relatives, were fixed squarely on him. Whispers rippled like wind through dry leaves. "This is absurd," he barked, his voice cracking under the weight of humiliation. "A man like him, in that suit, a so-called judge?" The words rang hollow, too loud, too desperate. He had tried to paint me as small, and in doing so, he made himself look smaller. I didn't need to respond. Years of presiding over courtrooms had taught me the power of silence. Silence can choke a man harder than any rebuttal. Then, out of nowhere, Livia's voice cut through the tension. "Mortimer, stop." Her tone wasn't pleading. It was sharp, commanding. The crowd turned to her, and for the first time, she wasn't the blushing bride-to-be. She was the daughter of a man who had built his life on honor. Mortimer's jaw tightened. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out brittle. "Honey, I'm just trying to keep standards." But the words trailed away because no one was laughing with him. Not one. He had tried to humiliate me in front of them all, but it was he who now stood exposed. His suit, his Rolex, his arrogance, it all looked gaudy under bright chandeliers, like cheap paint peeling off a cracked wall. I lifted my glass, calm as ever, and let the silence hang. Every second that passed was a verdict, and when Mortimer opened his mouth again, ready to claw his way back, I knew the true trial was only beginning. Mortimer straightened his tie, like a man trying to stitch his pride back together. He raised his voice, loud enough for the chandeliers to rattle with it. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, forcing a laugh, "let's not forget why we're here, to celebrate love. And yet somehow we've been distracted by wardrobe choices." He motioned toward me, flashing his teeth like a showman. A few polite chuckles scattered the room, but they died quickly, like sparks on wet wood. The crowd wasn't with him anymore, and he knew it. "Love isn't about appearances, Mortimer," I said evenly, my voice carrying across the hall. "But maybe you've forgotten that." That single line drew murmurs. Heads turned. People who had once nodded along to his arrogance now looked uneasy. It wasn't just about a suit anymore. It was about values. Mortimer's face flushed crimson. He jabbed a finger at me. "You think you're clever, don't you? Parading around in that bargain bin jacket. Trying to make me the villain." I didn't flinch. "I don't need to make you anything. You're doing that all by yourself." The words landed like a gavel strike. The guests leaned in, hungry for the next blow. Mortimer's composure cracked. His laughter turned shrill, his movements jerky. He grabbed a champagne flute from a waiter's tray, raised it high. "Fine. If the judge thinks he's so noble, then let's toast. To humility." He drained the glass in one gulp, but his hand shook as he set it down. And then, in that trembling silence, someone from the back muttered just loud enough to be heard, "Humility's not his strong suit." The laughter that followed wasn't with Mortimer. It was at him. And for the second time that day, he stood publicly stripped of his pride. Mortimer's grin collapsed into a grimace as the laughter spread. He slammed the empty glass onto the table, the sharp crack echoing louder than the orchestra in the corner. Head snapped in his direction. The illusion of control was slipping faster than he could grab it. "Enough!" he barked, pointing at me again, his voice shaking with fury. "This isn't your stage, old man. This is my wedding, my reputation on the line. And I won't have you ruining it with this pathetic act." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded envelope, waving it like evidence in a courtroom. "See this? Receipts. Every dime spent today came from me. The venue, the flowers, the orchestra, even the wine you're all sipping. It's mine, paid for by me. And I'll be damned if anyone thinks otherwise." Gasps rippled through the hall. It wasn't pride that rang in his voice now. It was desperation. A desperate man showing the world just how fragile his ego was. Livia's cheeks burned crimson, but not from embarrassment for me. Her eyes glistened, locked on the man she had promised to marry. "Mortimer, stop," she whispered, but the microphone had already picked up his every word. Everyone had heard. I leaned forward, calm and deliberate. "Money doesn't buy respect, Mortimer. You can't purchase dignity. And you certainly can't buy love." The room erupted. Not with applause, not yet, but with the unmistakable sound of guests murmuring their agreement. Mortimer's declaration, meant to elevate him, had become a noose around his own neck. He looked around wildly, eyes darting like a cornered animal. For the third time that day, he had tried to humiliate me, and ended up humiliating himself. And I knew the final blow was still to come. By now the orchestra had gone silent, bows suspended midair, as if even the music itself refused to cover Mortimer's meltdown. The air was thick with that peculiar mix of secondhand embarrassment and electric anticipation, the kind you only feel when someone's ego is circling the drain. Mortimer tugged at his collar, sweat glistening under the golden lights. "All of you, don't listen to him," he stammered, voice cracking. He's just an old man clinging to relevance." He jabbed the air with a trembling hand. "He has nothing. I gave this family everything." A low murmur rolled through the guests. Faces that once smiled politely now carried the unmistakable look of judgment. He was bleeding credibility, and he knew it. I simply folded my hands in front of me. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need theatrics. Years of holding court had taught me that the quieter you are, the louder the truth becomes. "Mortimer," I said, my voice calm, almost gentle, "the more you speak, the more you reveal. Maybe it's time you considered what exactly you've been revealing tonight." The silence that followed was heavier than any verdict I'd ever delivered. Even Forrest, the guard, shifted his stance, ready for whatever storm might break next. Mortimer's eyes darted toward the mic on the stage. He lurched forward, nearly tripping over a chair, and grabbed it like a drowning man clutching driftwood. "If anyone here thinks he is a man to look up to," Mortimer shouted, the feedback squealing, "then you're fools. He's nothing, a nobody, and I'll prove it before this night is over." The crowd gasped. My daughter covered her mouth, tears welling. Mortimer had just sworn war, in front of everyone. And in that moment, I knew the trial was ready for its final witness. Mortimer clutched the mic, his voice echoing off the marble walls like the rant of a man unraveling. He raved about money, prestige, the circles he claimed to belong to. Every sentence was another shovel of dirt in the grave he was digging. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some crossing their arms, others shaking their heads. And then, from the corner of the hall, a voice cut through the chaos. Steady, confident, sharp as a blade. "Enough." All eyes turned. It was Elsie, my longtime colleague, one of the fiercest attorneys I'd ever known. She walked forward, heels clicking like a metronome counting down a judgment. Mortimer froze, the microphone trembling in his grip. "Mortimer," she said, her tone dripping with disdain, "you've done a fine job proving your own arrogance. But perhaps it's time this room knew the truth about the man you've been trying to humiliate." The crowd leaned in. Mortimer's smirk twitched, desperate to stay on his face. "Truth? What truth? He's a clerk, a nobody. Look at him." Elsie didn't blink. "That nobody has spent decades serving this country. That man is Chief Justice Reginald Carter of the Texas Supreme Court." The words cracked across the room like thunder. Gasps. Then a wave of whispers surged through the hall. Mortimer's grip on the mic slackened. His eyes darted wildly, searching for denial, for escape, for anything. And me? I simply stood there, hands folded, the weight of silence once again on my side. Mortimer's jaw dropped, but no sound came out. The defendant had just been named. And the jury, every guest in that room, was ready to hear the verdict. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, the shuffle of chairs as guests leaned forward. Some covered their mouths in shock. Others glanced at Mortimer with open disgust. The name carried weight, more than Rolexes and wine lists ever could. Chief Justice. The words hung in the air like a verdict already rendered. Mortimer's lips moved, but no sound came out. His face flushed, then drained of color, his arrogance bleeding away under the spotlight of truth. I stepped forward, calm, steady. Years of the bench had taught me not just how to speak, but how to be heard. Mortimer called me a clerk. I said evenly, my voice carrying without the need for a microphone. He judged me not by my words, not by my deeds, but by the price tag of my suit. The chandeliers caught the light on my jacket, the very same fabric he had mocked. I let the silence stretch, the symbolism sharp as a blade. Character, I continued, my tone rising, is not woven into silk or stitched into Armani. It is measured in the choices we make when no one is watching, in the way we treat those we believe beneath us. Tonight, Mortimer revealed more about himself than he ever meant to. A murmur of agreement rolled through the hall. Someone clapped. Then another. The applause grew, swelling like a tide Mortimer could not hold back. I turned my eyes on him, unblinking. "Mortimer, you wanted to shame me. But the only man stripped bare tonight is you." The crowd erupted in applause, and Mortimer staggered back, humiliated, cornered, exposed. But deep down, I knew his pride wasn't finished fighting. And a man's pride can be more dangerous than his lies. Mortimer's face twisted as the applause rolled through the hall. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the raw, boiling fury of a man whose empire of ego had been set on fire. He grabbed the microphone back, his voice breaking with desperation. "Don't clap for him," he shouted, veins standing out on his neck. "You think a title makes him better? You think a robe and a gavel mean he's worth more than me? I'm the one who's built something real. Money, status, influence. Without me, this wedding wouldn't even exist." His words rang out hollow, bouncing off the chandeliers like echoes in an empty canyon. Guests shifted in their seats, eyes narrowing. The applause had stopped, replaced by an uneasy silence, one that cut deeper than any jeer. Livia rose slowly from her chair, her voice trembling but firm. "Mortimer, enough. You've embarrassed me. Embarrass yourself. This isn't about money or status. It never was." For a split second, I thought he might collapse into silence. But pride is a stubborn beast. He sneered, pointing at me. "And you," he hissed, "you think you won tonight? You think people will remember your speech? No, they'll remember me. Mortimer Gray, the man who never bowed." The words were meant to sound powerful, but his voice cracked on the last syllable. The irony was suffocating, because everyone in that room had just witnessed him bow, not to me, but to his own vanity. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only the first rows could hear, though I knew the hush of the room would carry it farther. "Mortimer, sometimes a man doesn't need to kneel. His fall does it for him." The crowd gasped. Mortimer's face went pale. And in that moment, I saw it, his pride cracking like glass under too much weight. The silence that followed was brutal. Mortimer stood frozen, chest heaving, his words still hanging in the air like smoke after fire. But the crowd had shifted. No longer an audience. They had become his jury. And every face staring back at him carried the same verdict. Guilty. A woman near the front whispered to her husband, not bothering to hide it, "I can't believe Livia almost married that man." Her husband shook his head, eyes fixed on Mortimer like he was something rotten. He tried to salvage himself. Straightening his tie, he puffed out his chest, forcing a smile that never reached his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's move on, shall we? There's a wedding to celebrate." But no one moved. No one laughed. The orchestra sat motionless. Even the servers froze, trays balanced in midair. That's when it hit him. The isolation. The power he thought money bought had evaporated in an instant. His allies weren't allies at all. They were just spectators, and they turned their chairs to watch his collapse. Livia stepped away from him, her eyes red but resolute. She crossed the floor to stand beside me, her arms slipping around mine. The gesture was small, but in that charged silence, it was thunder. Mortimer's smile twitched, then cracked. "Livia, wait." But she didn't. She didn't even look back. The whispers grew into open murmurs now, people shaking their heads, some even chuckling under their breath. Mortimer was no longer the host, the groom, the man with the money. He was a fool, standing alone in a spotlight he couldn't escape. And for the first time all night, he looked like he knew it. Mortimer's breathing turned ragged. His face flushed the deep red of a man cornered with no way out. His eyes darted from guest to guest, searching for one, just one, who might still nod in his favor. But the room had already rendered its judgment. The applause for me still lingered in the air, like a ghost he couldn't chase away. Then he snapped. "You think you're all better than me," he shouted, his voice breaking into a shrill edge. "You sit there, sipping champagne I paid for, eating food I provided, and you dare to judge me? Me?" His fist slammed against the mic stand, sending a screech of feedback through the hall. Guests winced, some covering their ears. He grabbed another glass of champagne from a passing tray, downed it in one gulp, then hurled it against the wall. The shatter rang out, crystals scattering across the floor. Gasps rippled through the room. "Mortimer, stop." Livia's voice cracked, but he was past hearing. Pride had eaten him alive, and all that was left was rage. I stepped forward, calm, my shadow stretching long across the marble floor. You've just proven everything I said, Mortimer. Respect isn't bought. Dignity isn't demanded. And now, in front of everyone, you've lost both. The crowd erupted again, but not in applause, this time in open laughter. Mortimer, once the man who thought he controlled the stage, had become the night spectacle. He tried to shout over it, his words drowned out, his arms flailing. The more he fought, the more ridiculous he looked. And in that moment, I knew the final gavel hadn't yet fallen. But when it did, it would shatter him completely. Mortimer stood in the wreckage of his own tantrum, shards of glass glittering like judgment at his feet, sweat staining the collar of his designer shirt. The room no longer feared him. They pitted him. And in some ways, that was worse. I stepped closer, not rushing, just deliberate, each footfall echoing like a clock ticking down. My hand brushed the lapel of my old suit, the same suit that had started all this. What he thought was my weakness had become my armor. For years, I began, my voice low but carrying, I've watched men mistake wealth for wisdom, arrogance for authority, and I've watched them fall every time. Because the world doesn't remember the size of your bank account. It remembers the size of your character. The guests hushed, the laughter fading into something heavier. Even Mortimer went still, his rage choking in his throat. I lifted my glass of water, simple, plain, the kind a clerk might drink, and held it high. Tonight isn't about money or titles or who bought the wine. Tonight is about my daughter and the man she deserves. And let this moment serve as a reminder. A wedding celebrates love, not ego. Applause thundered. Livia's hand squeezed mine, tears streaming down her face, not from shame but from pride. Mortimer staggered back, the reality crushing him. The guests were no longer his. The stage was no longer his. The night, the love, the respect, it all belonged elsewhere. And still, I hadn't struck the final blow. That was coming, and he would never see it leave him standing. The applause rolled like thunder, shaking the chandeliers above. Mortimer, desperate, lurched toward the microphone one last time, his tie askew, his face a mask of fury and panic. But Forrest, the guard, stepped forward, hand firm on his shoulder. "That's enough, sir," he said, calm but immovable. The room went silent. Everyone watched as Mortimer struggled against the inevitable, his pride flailing harder than his body ever could. Forrest didn't drag him. He guided him, slow and deliberate, through the grand hall. Every eye followed, every whisper burned. The man who thought he owned the night was being escorted out like a drunk at a dive bar. Just before the doors closed behind him, Mortimer twisted, shouting, "You'll regret this, all of you." But his voice cracked, drowned out by the echo of the heavy oak doors slamming shut. I lifted my glass once more, my old suit catching the light. The same jacket he mocked, the same fabric he swore would keep me out, now symbolized everything he lacked. Patience, honor, dignity. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, voice steady, "let's return to what truly matters. Love, family, and the kind of legacy no money can buy." The orchestra struck a chord. Guests rose to their feet, and Livia, my daughter, walked to me, slipping her arm through mine. Together, we stepped toward the altar, unbroken, united. And in that final image, as laughter and joy filled the hall once more, I knew the verdict had been delivered. Mortimer had lost everything that mattered. And I had won, not with fists, not with wealth, but with truth. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right.